What happens at laser tag never stays at laser tag.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
I feel like you could be like in Ghostbusters or something.
Oh my God, you have got some stories.
Let's talk about laser tag.
Who knew you were a laser tag legend?
Time to get laser unfocused. Tag Talk with Tivia.
Welcome to Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Hi, I'm Tivia. The story of the original laser tag Photon goes back nearly 40 years, but one director is channeling his passion for the game into bringing that story to the screen. Today, I'm being joined by Jason Helton, who is the director of a documentary in progress that's titled Let There Be Light, Photon and the Birth, Life, and Legacy of Laser Tag. So welcome, Jason. I'm excited to hear about your documentary progress. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to see you again.
Well, you as well. And I'd love for you to start by just telling me a little bit about your background, both with laser tag and with media production.
Okay, well, both are long stories. I'll try to make them somewhat quick. My background with laser tag started at, in fourth grade. I guess it would have been 1986. It was Tommy Moscato's 10th or 11th birthday or something, whatever the age would have been. And he was taking us to a place called Photon down in North Point in Baltimore. And I had heard nothing about it. This was obviously pre-internet days, and we didn't have cable or any good stuff like that. So I knew nothing about it except for, I'd started seeing commercials on TV for like laser tag with the Z, and the Worlds of Wonder equipment. And as a massive sci-fi nerd who grew up on reruns of Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers, I had to go, and going and playing Photon the first time was, I almost want to say, like a religious moment. It was like, as a nerdy kid in the 80s who was not the most physically fit, who was not the most popular, it's like, it was a place that let me suspend disbelief for 6.5 minutes that I could be a Photon warrior. And it stuck with me throughout the years. And I only played at that North Point Photon twice, for his birthday in fourth grade and his birthday in fifth grade. And they happened to open one up in Ocean City, and one of the most wonderful memories I have of my grandmother is we would go on the boardwalk at Ocean City, and she would hand me $5. That was my allowance for the evening, and that allowed me to play 2 games of Photon. I could go to the Marty's Playland and get in a game of Space Harrier on, the old Sega game. And then afterwards, she would buy me a slice of pizza and a birch beer from the dough roller. And we'd sit there and she'd listen to me, prattle on about how cool Photon was. And, then it was gone. And then I ended up working at the Ultrazone in Baltimore. I had started playing there and begged for a job. And apparently, because I showed up at the job interview at like 17 or 18 years old in a suit for this job that paid minimum wage, that convinced them to hire me. And I worked there for 3 years. It was the best job I ever had. I ended up managing laser tag for Discovery Zone when they were trying it out. I was the district manager for the pilot store for that, and ended up buying my own portable one for a little while and traveled for a little bit and made some money and had some fun. But I've always loved the game itself. When it comes to media, I've been in media probably almost as long as I've been into laser tag. Well, a little bit less. But I started working in radio many, many years ago, ended up moving onwards and upwards, did some time over at National Public Radio as an engineer, was working at XM, or now it's Sirius XM, but I was working over at XM, left radio and got into, journalism. So I was writing for Village Voice Media. They had a nerd culture website called Topless Robot that basically was all about nerd stuff. And I started, actually, of all things, wrote an article about Photon for one of the other publications that I was writing about. which got me in touch with George Carter and, started this whole dialogue with him. And then, from there, I started working in film, doing like some small stuff. I did a little bit of acting, a little bit of producing back corporate films and things like that, and ended up doing some editing work for some documentaries. And then decided, you know what, I need to make a go at this. And there was no other topic that I could think of that I was more suited for than to talk about the greatest laser tag game of all time.
Well, very good. And for those who are unfamiliar with the origins of laser tag, can you kind of give us an overview of how Photon began and what you've learned through developing it as a documentary here?
So, Photon began, and George Carter III, the inventor of the game, him along with Jim Dooley, they actually won the patent for it and all that kind of stuff, was inspired, like so many of us of that age, by a trip to see Star Wars. And, he was working in, I believe it was Las Vegas. He had a go-kart track out in Las Vegas, went and saw Star Wars one time. He was very clear with me that he only saw the film one time, and then had this brilliant idea of that the scene of, Han, Luke, and Leia running through the halls of the Death Star being chased by stormtroopers was just like the cops and robbers kind of games that they played as children. And that, basically watching that, it was kind of keeping score in the form of dead stormtroopers. But the idea is it was a game that everybody played in some way, shape, or form. And wouldn't it be cool to modernize it? And the technology was not there, and so he kind of shelved the idea until on and off until the 80s, the early 80s. And as computers started becoming affordable, they weren't really affordable, but being something that could be purchased for the home and for offices and things like that, he was able to go out and make a go of it. And within, I believe, I'd have to look at my notes, but I think he said it was from the time he actually really started working on it to the time it was completed was about 18 months that he built this thing from scratch, and opened his first store in Dallas, Texas, and it exploded, sort of. It was an expensive but incredibly popular game that he's a very, very smart man. I look up to him immensely because he knew that this game, because of the amount of technology that went into it, the costs were in a way astronomical for those times. I believe, in talking to some people over the years, just the arena alone nowadays to replicate it would cost in the millions. So we're talking back in the day. I mean, there's a lot of tech that went into this and things like that. He knew that he could not afford necessarily to buy all the equipment to keep opening corporate stores. So he franchised it, which was brilliant, because then basically, as he sold franchises, they were paying for the manufacture of their own equipment. So, and then Photon spread out. I mean, I forget what the numbers are offhand. I'm having a little bit of a senior moment here, but I think at the long run, I think 40 centers opened, give or take, and I want to say it was like 75 or 80 franchises were sold. And then as quickly as it rose, it started to fall. And but it was an amazing, amazing game. One of the big things that sticks out to me, the difference between Photon and other laser tag forms, is just as much as our friend Eric Guthrie would criticize me for using the word immersive, it was immersive in that you really did walk into a different world. It wasn't so much a game as it was, this cathartic moment, at least for a kid of 11 or 12 like me. So it's just a lot different than what you would consider traditional laser tag, if that makes sense.
Although it gave birth to everything that came thereafter. And I know that George Carter considered it a fad back in the day, but to think that it has had the longevity that we're coming up on 40 years since the beginning of laser tag, and it all started with Photon. So you've got to really pay homage to the original, and that's exactly what you're doing by telling the story through a documentary. So I'd love to know what made you decide to embark on this Photon documentary project.
Um, Kind of by accident. I had written quite a few articles on Photon. I had pursued, and I had met George for the first time at the 25th anniversary. I guess it was 25th or 30th anniversary of
30th, we were both there.
30th. Yeah, we both met him that day, and he and I got to talking, and you know, all of a sudden he's like, oh, you're so and so. I'd read some of your articles, and the first thing that goes through my mind is, oh crap, what did I say? Like, and because I'm like, if you've had a chance to meet George, he's a very commanding presence. He just kind of sits there and looks intense. He's a super nice guy, one of the nicest men I've met. But there's an intensity to him, and I'm just like, not having known him, I'm just like, uh-oh, what I do? And he just very, very politely is like, I really liked what you did. And I'm like, okay, and it's like, and it was, as I was writing articles about it and things like that and exploring it deeper, I ended up doing a presentation. There's a thing called Nerd Night that is all over the country. And a friend of mine does the management for the one in Philadelphia, and he was looking for talks. And I'm like, you know what? I've dabbled in comedy, and I know a lot about Photon. I'm like, why don't I do a talk on Photon? And I put together this, what was supposed to be like a 10-minute long PowerPoint / stand-up routine about Photon, mixed in, obviously the history and the marketing and all that good stuff with a little bit of humor, mostly at the marketing. And, it was supposed to be like a 10 or 15-minute long talk, and I ended up going on for about 45 minutes, and so much was like off the cuff. And what was interesting about it is that, I was the first speaker because I'd driven like 2.5 hours to get up there, and the plan was for me to like speak and bounce because I had to like work the next day. And apparently, like right before, right after I went off, all these people came up and were just like, oh my God, that was amazing. I drove here from New York to see this presentation, or I drove here from Baltimore to see this presentation. It's like, you guys are here for me? And, it was just like, and somebody said to me, like, when's the book coming out? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you're a wealth of knowledge on this. The story really should be told in this age, this inventive thing. When's the book? And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to. And so I sat there and I started researching it for a book. And then as I was researching, so much of this was visual. And there's so much there's no words that I can use to describe truly what Photon looks like and feels like. And so I decided the best way for me to do that, I started dabbling in video for, doing training videos and things like that for my old employer. And I'm like, this isn't that, this is a visual story. And I think this is the way to go with it. And people agreed, and we got our initial Kickstarter funding and got to work. And it's taken so much longer than I would have liked it to. Originally, the plan was simple. We had the Photon convention was coming up. And this was right, and I guess it was 2019. We were getting ready for the Photon convention. I had purchased my camera. I had gotten everything arranged and lined up, and I was ready to go and interview everybody. It was a captive audience. I was going to be able to interview everyone I wanted to. And then it got canceled because of the pandemic. And so, talking about like, putting out your fire, I was ready at that point to kind of just cancel it and just be like, I'm done. I can't do this. And then I kind of, talked to some friends of mine in the film industry. I was working on, starting to do some documentary work with some other friends and things like that. And it was like, they're like, you just need to reframe things. There's a way of doing this that might work. And I sat there and I thought about it, and I did reframe it, and that's how we got to the project, how it exists today.
Well, please share just a little bit about the process and the timeline and what has happened so far. Where are you in the process, and how soon do you think you'll be able to pull it together the way you would like it to be, having done all the interviews and whatnot that you have? Tell me about what you've done so far.
So we have been all over the country. Well, not quite all over there, but we've hit quite a few places. From Pennsylvania to New Jersey, New York, Florida. Florida, Dallas, Texas. Kentucky. I mean, all over the place, traveling and getting these interviews. And to put it in perspective, I've probably recorded about 6 or 7 terabytes of actual raw footage from interviews and things like that. So we're talking hours and hours of interviews have been shot. So that part's done, aside from getting a little bit of some things that I may need to redo, or if an opportunity arises, I'll still shoot some more. But the principal photography is finished. The post-production is in process. One of the things that I had no idea how hard it would be, from the get-go, was how hard it is to write a documentary. I've written articles all over the place. It's just like writing an article, except for the fact that you're not writing it. You're just using the words that other people have said. It's like word spaghetti, and trying to pull out single noodles of ideas and put them, aligned properly. And I'm not one of those documentary directors where I will sit there and manipulate things. I don't like massive cuts, so where you'll hear somebody talking, and then all of a sudden you hear their voice shift because they're on a complete, somebody's piecing their words together to make it fit. I want it to be authentic, and so it means that sometimes I have to bounce back and forth a little bit with the topic. Sometimes I have to listen to it 12 times to figure out, wait a second, I need to put this elsewhere. Or is there a way that I can edit it where I can keep their thought contained and not lose its meaning if I have to use it elsewhere, or if I have to scrap it entirely? So that is a very difficult aspect of it. The editing and the technical part, that's super easy. I mean, I can, I've been doing editing, for film a long time. And so, well, it feels like a long time. And so it's not difficult to do that. It's piecing all of the ideas together, all the concepts together. And then for a game that is almost 40 years old, it's amazing how much information has not come out that I'm digging up and finding. And so what happens is I'll be having an interview. One of the things we did is we started doing some Zoom call interviews when basically I had run out of money, and all these people wanted to be interviewed, and I just couldn't schedule any more travel and things like that. And we did some interviews over Zoom, and I found out all these interesting things that ended up sending me down research rabbit holes, where now I have this whole other aspect that I have to explore. And trying to be a good journalist, I do explore it. And so it's like I got to put pause on editing and things like that, because now the narrative may have changed for a section. And so it's definitely a difficult process. It takes a lot of time, and not to sound like one of those starving artist types, but you have to kind of be in the right mindset to be able to do it. And like I will tell my wife all the time, she's like, why don't you just take a week or two off of work and just finish your raw edit? It's like, oh, I can't work that way. It just doesn't, my muse doesn't speak to me in that way, but a lot of it is just being in the right mindset for the right sequence. For something like laser tag, you would be surprised at how emotional the conversations get.
Actually,
And
I would not be surprised at all, because I think that you are exploring a topic that speaks very deeply to anybody who's really engaged in the experience. Whether it's photon or whether it's some other form of laser tag, the people who have been touched by it so deeply that they make it a part of their lives, it is an emotional thing. So I'm not surprised to hear that at all.
well, no, and what's amazing, like I was interviewing a very good friend of mine who I've known from the laser tag community for over 20 plus years. And as we were talking, he was telling me about his experiences at Photon and how he would go pretty much every weekend, and then, didn't have a lot of friends, but he knew he could go to Photon and still talk to people and be social and all that kind of stuff. And he talks about when his grandmother took him to North Point, you know, and he goes and walks up to the door and tries to open it, and it's locked on a Saturday afternoon. And he said he was like 11 or 12 at the time. And, apparently he said his grandmother said, we'll try back next weekend. And they go back next weekend, and it's the same thing. And, the question that I asked him is like, you're 11 or 12 years old, that, you didn't have the internet, you didn't know this was happening. So it's not like you could exchange phone numbers or email addresses or things like that. How did you process that loss? And he's just like, and like, he just sat there for a second, and he was, finally was like, it was kind of like a death, in that my friend group was taken away from me and I couldn't even say goodbye. And this is and he starts like tearing up, and it's just like, I mean, I'm sitting there shooting it and I'm getting a little choked up, because it's just like, I feel you, man, because it's like, so his case, his entire world, you know 11 or 12-year-old kid, kind of revolved around that place, and to lose it without warning, it was a death for him. And it's surprisingly emotional. And I gotta say too, it's massively emotional for me in the process. One of the things that I regret the most about this project is, when it comes to the time that it's taken, because, my plan was always to, oh, I could do this quickly, let's knock this out, get it moving, that kind of thing. And of course, the world gets in the way. Um, you know, Van Archer was one of the people I interviewed in Dallas, and he was an amazing interview. I mean, this man was so passionate about Photon. I mean, he loved it, and the stories that he told and how much this had an influence on him. He got emotional talking about other players who had become very good friends. And then I guess it was like 6 months or a year later, he died. And it's like, he never got to see it. And that, to this day, when I go and edit sequences with him, it hurts. I mean, he and I became pretty friendly after the interview, and it's just like, I'm like, the first thing that comes through my head is, dude, I'm sorry. I wish I'd gotten this done faster. And, the other thing too is, like my friend in Florida who experienced the loss of his photon, and all that kind of stuff. I kind of did too, in a way, and I'm kind of revisiting it every time I open up the file, if that makes sense. And so if I'm not in the right mindset, I mean, for the fun parts, it's easy. But when we start, I have a great, wonderful conversation with Mark Mueller, the gentleman who ran the last Photon, essentially, XP Laser Sport in Laurel. And he and I have known, I've worked for him. He and I have been friends for so very long. And I consider him one of the nicest people, one of the best friends I have, probably. And, as a journalist, I have to ask some hard questions, when it comes to things when they end and all that kind of stuff. And, to see the amount of emotion that comes out of him after I ask, and I even prefaced it. I'm like, look, dude, I'm sorry. I have to ask these questions for the full story. But it's like, I could see his pain, obviously, as we were discussing this, and then to see it on screen as I edit it. It's kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid, and it's just emotionally draining. It's wonderful when it works, and at the end, it's worth every bit of the effort. But damn, does it not sting sometimes?
Well, that I think is what really gets to the heart of the story and why it's something that people care about all these many years later. And you named some awesome people that you've spoken to. I'd love to know who have been some of the most really integral interviews in the telling of the story. Where did some of the key pieces come into play?
Um, it's interesting. I've never actually really thought about that. My trip, obviously, to Dallas, Texas was amazing. Getting to talk with George, obviously. I probably filled 3 memory cards with George alone. And, it was probably like a 3 hour long interview. And I've never interviewed anyone that long before. So it was in my interview style is kind of off the cuff. I go in there with a couple prepared questions, and then I just go off the rails based off of how I feel things are going. And 3 hours into it, I had finally just started to run out of questions. And then the sad thing is within an hour, I was like, oh, I should have asked him this, and so it's just amazing. The thing, other people, obviously Randall Medding, the great Bodie Lee, gave me he was the first interview that I shot for this film. And he gave me such a passionate interview that it was wonderful. And, just so heartfelt that I absolutely loved it. Giles Witherspoon Boyd, he became my friend in my time at Ultrazone. And when we found out that Photon had reopened in Laurel, I took him there. And, not knowing that he had had the past with Photon that he had, where, he had lost that connection, and the amount of emotion that, came out of him. I mean, we were shooting this in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in a house that not Fort Lauderdale, in Orlando, Florida, in a house that he had just moved into like 3 days prior. And I think we started shooting at like 11 o'clock at night. And like, I didn't get out of there until like 1:30. I mean, just so much amazing information. Some of the guys, I don't remember all their names offhand, but a lot of the Zoom interviews from the team of people up at Kenilworth, were amazing. Especially the one guy who admitted to the fact that they actually did rob the place when it was closed down, to steal memorabilia. There was an ongoing story throughout all of the interviews with people from Kenilworth, basically like, oh yeah, we heard people after it closed went in there and took stuff, and everybody told me the same story of, oh, I remember this guy, he had this at his house, so yeah. And then this one guy just comes out, I was like, yes, statute of limitations is over. Yes, I went in there with a bunch of us and we took stuff. And it was just amusing to see. And I like, the question that I had was like, what was so important about this game that you could no longer play that made you risk like criminal charges? And the answer was just, I don't remember it offhand, but it was basically something around the fact that this was their life. This was where they wanted a piece of it. So
Well, it sounds like you got some really interesting stories from a lot of the players, and the players are the ones who, really were the heart and soul of the game. But Photon was so much more than just the game. And you and I kind of had similar experiences from watching the TV show and the marketing as we were young. And I know that's what inspired the name Tivia Chick. So I know have got some feelings about that as well, but I'd love to know like how much of the emphasis is being put on the game versus the show versus the merchandising or the blend of it all. How are those pieces coming together in the story?
So the story, that's a great question. And the story at its heart is about the game. But you're absolutely right. The game is not, complete, at least in my opinion, until you talk about the home version, the toys, the marketing. One of the jokes that I had in my little stand-up routine is that they, employed the Spaceball School of Marketing for Photon, in that you could buy anything with the Photon logo. And if we look at your, what's behind you, I know you have quite the collection.
Trying to find some
but
of the most obscure things and just right at
the
my
glasses,
hands.
I knew you were going to break out the glasses. I knew those were coming. So, what I find, so yes, the TV series, the books, all will be covered in the film. One of the problems, to be quite honest, the difficulties that I have is in the form of licensing. When it comes to the TV show, Deke Entertainment, which is no longer here, but has been bought by a company called Wild Brains out in California, I finally did get a response from them a while back about licensing some of the footage. And here I am, stupid me, thinking this is a show that's sat in the vaults on magnetic tape for 20 plus years gathering dust. They have no interest in this. They'll probably give it to me. Yeah, no. Basically they were just like, the first question that they had was, where did you get your source material? And it's like, I'm not going to tell you. But I have a collection of all but the one missing episode. And so they're like, well, we'll talk to you about licensing some clips for your film, but they have to be clips that have zero music in them. And anybody who watches the Photon TV show knows that there are no clips without music in them. And I'm like, oh, do you mean the licensed music? Because the Photon TV series love to have horrible covers of like Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone or things like that. And they're like, no music at all. And I'm like, uh-oh. And so basically I have to scour through about 18 hours of, as much as it is dear to my heart, it is one of the worst TV shows I've ever had to see. And so the idea of me scouring like 18 hours worth of Photon to find places without music, mark them, send them the time code, and say, how much would it cost? It's, a lot of it's going to play into the licensing and what I can and cannot do. Fair use does come into play. But again, I have to be able to make an argument for fair use. And I hate to say it, but if things, we're out of money. And so if it gets to the point where I have to put something in or take something out for fear that I'm going to get into a copyright lawsuit later on, I have to take it out because I can't afford to leave it in and get in trouble. And so it's finding that balance, when it comes to that. And I have a great director who I've worked with in the past for documentaries who is basically going to review everything and let me know what he thinks is going to be fair use. And he is actually a college professor, and he's like, yeah, I got some resources that will help you figure that out. So, the plan is to cut the movie the way I want it and then scale it back and fill in the blanks after I have to cut it apart for certain things. Other aspects are just kind of difficult. I loved the book series. As god-awful as the TV series was, those books, at least the first one, was absolutely amazing. The whole let's kill Hitler thing, that was a little bit iffy. But
Thieves of Light is the one you're talking about that, I think
that was the good one.
Really go back to.
Well, I was interested. I liked them all. I mean, especially 12-year-old Jason liked them all. Especially The Search for Mom. That one really stuck to me. Like, I remember like loving that book. And they were written by a gentleman called David Peters, who, if you haven't figured that out, is the great comic book writer Peter David. He and I have mutual friends. from film and television and things like that, and conventions. I have reached out to Peter David, and right now he's going through some health issues, so I would not dare to bother him right now. But I have reached out several times, basically like, look, give me 5 minutes. Just, crickets. And I understand why. I mean, it was a job. It was him trying to probably put food on the table back in those days. He's given a loose outline of scripts, and he did the best that he could with them. I think he should be proud of them, but, so there's aspects that I just, can't get into just because I don't have the resource to do it.
Well, those elements certainly just kind of add to the whole story that Photon had. And I feel like this is a moment to just take a break for some levity. So you could help me out with a joke that I break out, not
Okay.
mine, but we gotta share it here. So you know the joke I'm about to start with. Bodhi Lee and Mandar walk into a bar. Bodhi Lee says, "I'll have a light beer." And Mandar says,
He'll have an IPA. All right.
"I'll have a dark beer."
Of course. Yeah. I had to mess with you a little bit. Come on.
You know this joke. And
I've
David
never heard
Stay,
that before, actually. I've
What's
never
that?
heard that. I've never heard that.
Oh, you have heard this because that joke David Stay told on stage at Focon,
Oh, that's
and he
right.
gave credit to Randy, who I am assuming is Randall Medding. But if there's somebody else, got to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, you're right. Part of the problem is that first Focon, I was so nervous sitting at the table with George, and like, but I had imbibed a little bit at that point, just because. So some of it is definitely a blur. Between me, God rest his soul, David was such a fun guy, but I think I probably had done enough drinking by the time that he was telling his jokes that I may have missed that one. But
Well,
oh
fair
wow.
enough. But that was quite an experience, just kind of hearing from the different perspectives at that situation. And there was a lot that was revealed, I think, that people learned from if they were lucky enough to be sitting in that room. So I'd love to know, what is the most unusual thing that you have learned about Photon during this whole documentary journey?
The one that gets me, and it's one that I discovered recently, is apparently somebody was trying to make a Photon video game for arcades.
Mm.
And I've gone way down the rabbit hole with this. Recently, it was brought to my attention that there was a flyer when back in the 80s, especially when a company was trying to pre-sell arcade machines, they would put out a flyer that would go to all these conventions and things like that, saying, "Hey, we've got this new license, or we've got this new game coming out." Well, there's one that popped up that somebody sent me, that said, coming soon to arcades, Photon, a multiplayer arcade game. And I was just like, what the what? And looking at it, it looked like a very nondescript flyer. Basically, it just brief description of the gameplay: play 1 to 4 players, travel through a maze and stop it seemed like it had a little bit, if I remember correctly, it had a little bit to do with the TV series, it may have used some elements from the TV series, but it was multiplayer. And it had the big Photon logo on there, and it said at the bottom, licensed by Photon Entertainment. So I'm like, well, I know that guy. That's George. So I call him, and he's like, "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." And I sent him a picture of it. He's like, "Yeah, I didn't license this to an arcade game. The game had been the Photon name had been licensed for a Nintendo game over in Japan.
The Famicom game.
The Famicom game,
Mhm.
yes. But, and he knew of that, but he had no idea about an arcade machine. So I start digging into the company who was trying to sell this. And again, the name escapes me at the moment, but it was a company who is known for those really bad arcade machines in the 80s, like Trivia Whiz. And they were the most basic, nondescript, boring games on the planet. The graphics, I mean, literally, I remember seeing those like trivia whiz machines because one of the things that was on there, one of the categories that as a teenager, I'm like, ooh, it had a category called sex trivia. I'm like, what? That's really a bizarre, like, I don't know how you can make a trivia thing out of that, but I just remember seeing those games and they only put out like 4 or 5 titles. And I'm like, this seems to be like a massive leap from doing text only arcade games with 4 big buttons to say A, B, C, D to a 4-player multiplayer, Photon Spectacular. And then the trail ends. The company who had said that they had licensed it basically went bankrupt. It was in holding by some lawyer. I reached out to their office. I think the lawyer's dead. I mean, it's the trail pretty much stopped, but it was just so bizarre that somebody and the advertising on the flyer was talking about this international phenomenon that is Photon. And it's like,
Well, to
are
be
people
fair,
really?
Photon was an international phenomenon, but the video game,
Well, and so the
maybe
thing
not.
about it is like, I can't imagine that like the thing that George will always tell you is it was the merchandising, like the toys and the things like that, that had a distinct, had a lot of reasoning behind why he felt Photon declined. And I sat there and thought about it, like there's no way, based off of what he was describing to me, that he would have licensed the Photon name and concept to a like bottom tier arcade developer to make a lackluster game around a concept that graphically couldn't be done, in an arcade to make it look even remotely similar. It just, the whole thing screams like 1980s like scam of, snake oil salesman. I've got a new game for you. It's called Photon, and it's just kind of interesting to see that people were latching onto this, in what probably was like a get rich scheme. They probably were putting out this thing saying they licensed it with hope that they would raise enough money to license it. And, so it's very interesting to see, what people would do to get in with that cool Photon Kids crowd.
Mhm. Well, that definitely qualifies as a pretty interesting thing to dig up there. So then I wonder, what is the most rewarding part of the process for you?
You know what? It's the most rewarding thing with all of this has been the support of the fans. Um, you know, Photon fans are some of the most patient people in the world. Um, right off the bat, this was supposed to have been completed years ago. At least when I was initially talking about this, I'm like, oh, I'll have this done by 2020. That'll be easy. And here we are, it's 2023. And, one of the things that I'm very bad at, and I freely admit this, is I am terrible with updates and self-promotion in that, I'm not going out there and updating the blog, on the Photon Movie website or doing Kickstart updates and things like that. I'm bad at that because it's hard enough for me to, to juggle everything, and not and be able to do that whole self-promotion. Hey, look at me, I'm making a movie thing. And so the patience has been absolutely wonderful. The outpouring of support. I think it was last year, Toy Galaxy, well, now it's called Secret Galaxy, did a big story on Photon. They basically do like, historical toy videos. And they name dropped me and, talked about the film. And the amount of comments, like I posted on, when I saw this, somebody had pointed it out to me, and I, put a comment on the YouTube video saying, hey guys, thanks. I appreciate it. This was really cool. And the outpouring of support I got from me posting that message was like, oh my God, this is great. We can't wait for you to get this done. This is awesome. It's just been amazing. It really has just been heartwarming. especially going through, these have been some rough years for everybody. And to know that, you know, the response that I'm getting for this whole project is so positive. And then the big moment for me was, I guess it was MagFest. It's a big music and gaming festival in Washington, D.C. And we went there and presented the trailer for the film and had basically a panel about Photon and to talk about the film. And they booked us in one of the small panel rooms, maybe seated 100. And that room was full. And as we, I mean, there were people standing in the back, and granted, this was during COVID, we were all still masked and things like that. And there was definitely some empty seats in the middle because, nobody wanted to sit next to strangers. But I just remember walking out of that room, adrenaline still going, had a great panel, showed everything off. Everybody seemed to be super happy with everything and really loved it. And I walked by one of the other panel rooms, and it was like the big grand ballroom, and there was some panel going on. There was like 3 people in there. It's like, wow. I mean, I had the audience, and this was like 11 a.m. on a Saturday kind of thing. It's like just the outpouring of support that I got, that I've been getting, has been amazing, and it means a lot to me.
Well, that's tremendous. And I am so delighted to hear about the progress that you're making. And I also look forward to seeing this finished product. And is there anything else you'd like to share about the documentary at this stage?
So, a couple things. We are hard at work on this. It is taking a good bit of time, but we are in post-production. One of the really cool things that I've got going on with this is, because there's no place to, actually play Photon anymore. I didn't have any, way of like demonstrating the equipment. So I have a great animator who is actually reimagining Photon for the 21st century in an animated form. And my God, did it so cool. And basically he's, the explanation videos and things like that, he's animating out, but he basically took the Photon blueprints and recreated them in a 3D environment and modernized it to where, the walls have texture and there's light coming up out of the floor. And it's like, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm really excited when this whole thing is finished for people to see this just amazing, almost like, if you had unlimited amounts of money to build a Photon arena, this is what you would get. And it's a really cool glimpse as to what could have been.
Yeah.
So,
well, very good. I guess we're all just going to have to check out the movie and see this cool animation. And I thank you for being with me, Jason. And I always like to end these podcasts with a little rapid fire tag talk with some questions and quick answers. You game?
Yeah, always.
All right. Well, this is rapid fire tag talk Photon edition.
Okay.
First question. Favorite Photon arena you ever played?
I only played it 2, well, 3, North Point, Laurel, and Ocean City. My heart will belong to Ocean City just because of, Ocean City. It was a vacation,
Who was your favorite Photon character from the series?
Oh, I was a Bodhi Lee kid. I wanted to be him in the worst way.
Who is your favorite Photon player that you've gotten to either meet or play against?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm gonna have to say Randall Metting. He, was so gracious when I returned to the game, playing at Laurel for the first time, that he will actually, you know what? I have to do this. There is a story with him. I played at North Point, or no, I played at Ocean City, and I wanted to use the name Bodhi Lee, and or no, actually, I'm sorry, I was playing at North Point, and I wanted to use the name Bodhi Lee, and I was told no, you can't use it as a tournament name. Okay, fine. I went to Ocean City that summer, played, tried to use the name, and the guy said, sure. I said, wow, that's cool. They wouldn't let me at North Point, and they're like, he's like, who wouldn't let you? I'm like, I don't know, just whoever was working there. He's like, well, you let them know that Bodie said you can use the name. It was Randall working there when I was like 12. And like, so yeah, that stuck with me all these years. And so yeah, he will always be my favorite Photon player, actually, now that I think about it.
That's terrific. And yes, he encourages use of the name and anything that brings memory back to it.
Indeed.
That's great. Now, what was your favorite Photon souvenir?
Ooh. I never had the money to buy any, like as a kid, but my prized possession was my grandmother bought me a t-shirt from Ocean City that had the little like zappy guy on the front and the logo on the back. And I don't know what happened to that shirt, but I cherished it as a kid. It's my favorite shirt ever.
Now, there are a lot of really rare items out there, some of which who knows when they'll be seen again, but what would be your favorite Holy Grail item to get a hold of? If you could acquire any Photon souvenir that's out there, what would it be?
Wow. Okay. You know what I want? I want a base light. It's simple and just, but I would love to have that in my office, like behind me, just going all the time. You know, I want one of those in the worst way. So if anybody out there has one, I'll send you my address. Hook me up.
There you go. And what is your favorite Photon tagline that still lives on nearly 40 years later?
Oh, the light shines.
The light does shine, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It's getting a little dark here, but that's a good thing, because we need a little bit of darkness. But no, the light definitely shines.
The darkness could grow, but the light still shines.
Yeah, it does. So,
boy, we've brought out some of the old standbys.
Deep cuts.
Deep cuts indeed.
Yes.
But I thank you so much. That's my guest, Jason Helton, director of the documentary in progress titled Let There Be Light, Photon, and the Birth, Life, and Legacy of Laser Tag. Thank you so much, Jason. Can't wait for the movie.
Thank you so much. Can't wait for you guys to see it.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Listen for more episodes on the first and third Friday of each month. Want to be a guest on an upcoming episode? Find out more and follow my blog and website at TiviaChickLovesLaserTag.com.